What's really beneath all that sand? At first, the answer seems almost too obvious. Dig down, and you should find more sand. Dig deeper, and eventually, something has to stop you. But the surprising part is what can happen before you ever reach that point. The sand beneath your feet may contain groundwater and compacted layers of sediment. Deeper still, depending on the landscape, you may eventually reach solid rock, the ancient foundation beneath the surface. But there's an even stranger detail. Sand itself is already a record of movement and time. On beaches, waves can grind rocks and shells into tiny fragments, while currents carry those particles and rearrange them again and again. So the sand isn't simply sitting there. It is the newest layer of a much older story. And there is no single depth where sand always ends. The deeper you go, the more the layers can reveal about the landscape that existed before the surface you see today. The first sign that you're going deeper is not rock. It's water. Push through enough sand, and eventually the grains may become darker, heavier, and wet. Beneath the surface, groundwater can fill the tiny spaces between sediment, forming a hidden system beneath the beach. But there is no universal depth where that water begins. Rainfall, tides, seasons, and the sediments beneath the beach can all influence the position of the water table. The underground landscape can change even while the surface looks completely unchanged. And then the sand begins to change again. Loose grains can become increasingly compacted, with layers packed more tightly together. The easy movement disappears. Eventually, depending on the geology of that particular place, the sediment gives way to something much harder. Then comes the moment that changes the entire picture. The shovel hits something solid. Beneath the sand is rock. And that rock may have been there long before the beach above it ever existed. So how did all that sand get there in the first place? The answer begins with movement. Sand is produced by weathering and erosion, then transporting and deposited by forces such as waves, currents, wind, and ice. On beaches, waves can break down rocks, shells, and older sediment into smaller particles, while currents and tides continually move them along the coast. That means a beach is never really finished. The layer beneath your feet can be built, removed, and rebuilt over time. And that helps explain why sand depth can vary dramatically from one place to another. Some beaches have relatively thin sediment over the ground. Others can accumulate much thicker deposits. There is no single depth at which sand always ends. It depends on the landscape beneath it and how much sediment has collected there. But beaches are only one part of the story. In deserts, wind becomes a major force, carrying loose particles across the landscape and piling them into dunes. And those dunes can conceal something unexpected. Because once you look beneath the moving surface, you may find evidence of a landscape that existed long before the desert itself. That difference becomes important when you look at a place like the Sahara. The desert can appear almost endless, as though the entire region were buried beneath one enormous blanket of sand, but much of the Sahara is actually exposed rock or gravel. The dunes are only part of the landscape, and their depth varies across the region. Some dunes can rise more than 100 meters above the surrounding ground. So imagine following one downward, past the loose grains, past layers of compacted sediment. Eventually, in some places, you can reach the rock beneath. But the real surprise is not the rock itself. It is what the sediments and rocks below the surface can remember. Beneath parts of the Sahara are deposits connected to ancient environments that existed when the region was far wetter than it is today. Buried sediments can preserve clues about past water, soils, and changing climates, evidence of landscapes that existed long before the modern desert took shape. So digging downward isn't simply taking you deeper beneath the surface. It is taking you farther back in time. The sand may look like the story, but beneath it is evidence of what came before. So what's really beneath all that sand? Not another endless ocean of sand. Eventually, the loose surface gives way to groundwater in some places, compacted sediment, and depending on the geology, solid rock beneath. But that rock is more than something that stops a shovel. Along with the layers above it, it can preserve evidence of environments that existed long before the landscape we see today. A beach records the constant movement of waves, rocks, shells, and sediment. A desert can preserve traces of ancient rivers, lakes, soils, and climates within sediments beneath its dunes. And that changes the way you see the surface. What looks like an empty stretch of sand may actually be covering a buried landscape, one shaped by conditions completely different from those around us now. So the next time you stand on a beach or look across a desert, remember that you are not looking at the beginning of the story. You are looking at its latest layer. Beneath the sand is not just rock. It is a record of an earth that came before us.